The Americans have won the roll-off and will be attacking the Soviet defenses today. Unfortunately for them, they rolled a 3 on the time of day chart, so it will be a daytime fight against the Soviets. Of course, the Americans excel at the night battles. Well, with 4 units in reserve right now, the Americans have started the game with their observer team here on the right next to the Soviet ranged-in marker, protected by this nice river here. You see Soviet objective number 1 on the American right flank. The platoon of M109s directly in the center of this clump of trees, well protected by some line-of-sight blocking terrain. The American M1 tanks in between these two cornfields, right next to Soviet objective 2 next to the road. And all the way on the left flank you have a platoon of American mechanized infantry along with the company commander there. Across the fields we have the Soviets defending American objective number 1 on their right flank, the American left. A row of houses behind which we have a company minus of Soviet T-72s, and there on the left you have the Soviet battalion commander. And then the objective on the right, the second American objective next to their ranged-in marker. What you don't see is the Soviet BMP-2 company, which is in ambush, or the 2 Hinds, which are currently loitering off the table. So the Americans are prepared to begin their attack. They will start by rolling to see if they have any reserves coming in at the top of turn 1. Despite failing to get any reserves in on turn 1, the Americans have moved forward very aggressively with the M1 tank platoon moving a total of 14 inches. They're going to make use of their advanced stabilizers as they try to pick out some Soviet targets behind that building there. While the American mechanized infantry platoon has moved forward at terrain dash 24 inches to threaten that Soviet objective. Of course, the 109 platoon has remained in place, as has the American observer, as we begin to get ready for the American shooting phase on turn 1. The Americans began their turn 1 shooting phase with their M109 howitzers speaking for them. The observer here on the right managing to bring the bombardment in on the very first try. They managed to hit 2 Soviet tanks. The front one only rolled a 2 on its top armor save. That equaled the Americans' anti-tank value of a 4 with their 109 howitzers. And then the Americans made their firepower check, bailing that tank crew out. The M1 tanks on the American left opened fire. Half of them had fine line of sight to the Soviet tanks in the back. 2 of them were concealed, unfortunately. But they did manage to destroy the front T-72. They landed a hit on the back one as well, but being over 16 inches away, it managed to make its 3-up armor save, rolling a 6. So no chance for the Americans to bail it out. So that company right there remains in fine order. And of course the American mechanized company here on the left, despite moving at terrain speed, also did not have any targets to shoot at, so they remained in place waiting for the Soviet ambush to appear. During the Soviet turn 1 setup phase, they have laid ambush with their BMP-2 mechanized company behind these trees. It was a little tricky getting them all in there due to line of sight issues, but they're currently all at least 4 inches away from all enemy teams and 16 inches away from anybody with line of sight to them. Unit commander is right there in the center. And the infantry are still embarked in the BMPs as required. Over on the Soviet left, the tank crew has bravely remounted their T-72. So that company, down to 3 T-72 tanks, is ready to bring the fight back to the Americans as we begin Soviet turn 1 movement. Soviet Hind attack helicopters are taking advantage of the lagging American anti-aircraft vehicles coming on the right flank. They really want to take care of this 113 platoon. They're being joined by 5 BMP-2s with the infantry still inside, while these 4, while now out of command, have remained in place, so they will not suffer any penalties when they shoot at those M1 tanks in the cornfield. The battalion commander has moved over and will be joining them shortly, while the T-72 tank company, or what's left of it, has moved very cagily around these buildings. 2 of them will have line of sight to those M1s, making those M1s make some decisions in their turn. So now the Soviets are ready to open up fire and it's going to start with those BMPs. The Soviet BMP-2s opened fire on the American 113s, 2 shots apiece. Managed to do a number of 7 hits against the Americans. Of course, all of those Soviet shots going straight through the American 113s, pressed aluminum armor. The 2 on the left were penetrated twice. Firepower checks failed on all accounts, but the Americans, forced to make a remount check, failed to do just that, and so they tossed some grenades in their tracks, and they are now in flames. The one on the right did suffer to a Soviet firepower pass and blew up outright, with one of the large bases that was there not managing to escape the flames before the vehicle exploded. The company commander's 113 in the back did take a hit as well, but firepower check failed, and it was just the one hit, so the commander remains inside. After that, Soviet attack helicopters opened up on the infantry with their Gatling guns, managed to destroy another one of them, so all of them currently are pinned down, and essentially the Americans' attack on the Soviet right flank has been blunted. That was the highlight of the Soviet shooting phase, as these 4 BMPs managed to score 1 hit on the American tanks in the cornfield, but did no damage. The battalion commander didn't have a shot. He is just buying time until his reserves comes. Well, these 2 T-72s, their gunners are having some problems finding the American tanks. They rolled double ones, weren't able to land any hits. But I think the Soviet commanders can be pretty happy with the American attack blunted on the right flank. And these M1s will have to be dealt with. But the presence of the Soviet Mi-24 Hind helicopters will certainly help in that effort. The Americans, on their part, will have 2 dice to roll to see if they get any reserves in. It will surely be a priority for the American commander to bring in those VADS anti-aircraft pieces to take care of these Soviet helicopters. The Americans have a good start to their turn 2, rolling for 1 reserve unit to come in. That will be the VADS. And over here on the left, the 113 crew has remounted, and the infantry platoon has recovered from being pinned down. Good rolls on both accounts. So next is the American movement phase. The American anti-aircraft guns have rolled onto the table, 16 inches terrain dash in the cornfield, while the platoon commander for the M1 tanks has brought 2 tanks up to engage the Soviet BMPs, trying to get in with that 8-inch range so they cannot be targeted by those anti-tank missiles, leaving 1 tank behind here to deal with the Soviet tanks on the right. Americans here have held in place, waiting for the help from the M1 tanks to materialize. They will be shooting probably at those Hinds using their Dragon missile teams and law into those BMPs, but we shall see. Americans feeling a little less confident right now. They do still have some positioning on the Soviets, but they will need to do some damage in this turn of shooting. The Americans have recovered nicely during their turn 2 of shooting. It started out with the 109s opening fire, calling it a repeat mission right there on their pre-planned target. Hit the 1 Soviet tank, but the Soviet tank made its top armor check. Over here on the right, the M1 opened fire, hitting the Soviet tank once, but the front armor was proof against the American Sable round, and so that Soviet tank has survived. Did not open up with the anti-aircraft guns here. They were a little bit out of range from the Soviet Hinds, but it turns out that would not matter at all. These 3 tanks managed to hit a total of 3 times against the Soviets, destroying 2 BMPs and bailing out a third. One of the RPG teams was destroyed getting out of that middle destroyed BMP. Farther over to the left, a Law managed to take out one of the BMPs. Again, an RPG team was destroyed getting out of there. Even though their vehicles are still blazing, 2 of the Dragon missiles shot up at the Hinds that used to be there. A 1-hit Hind failed its invul save, and then Americans failed the firepower check. But the 50 caliber machine gun from the company commander's 113 managed to do the job, destroying one of the Hinds. And the second Hind just failed its morale check and has left the board. The curse of Soviet Army aviation is real, ladies and gentlemen. They are always flying off the board on me. So not bad for the Americans. Looking around the board, they will not be assaulting. They have pinned a number of Soviet teams, including a machine gun team, down after they had to bail out their vehicles, and have put the Soviet BMPs in disarray. So we will see if now the Soviets can recover. No reserve rolls yet for the Soviets in their turn 2 startup phase, but they have recovered nicely on the right flank, with these infantry teams becoming unpinned and that BMP-2 crew bailing back into its fighting vehicle. They are now ready to counterattack the Americans, who managed to do a little bit of damage to the Soviet right flank, but perhaps not enough to save them. We shall see. In the Soviet turn 2 movement phase, all the infantry have dismounted from their fighting vehicles. The company commander here ordering his troops to dig in, but they are a little nervous being around so many Americans. They did not manage to entrench themselves. Soviet BMPs have broken out a little bit, failed a cover check through this one as it got bogged down in the line of trees, but the other one punched right through. And now we have 4 Soviet BMPs looking at the American infantry and 1 unit leader looking at the American tanks. The Soviets, sensing that the Americans have overextended themselves on their left flank, have moved the tank commander up to get a side armor shot on that M1, along with the 3 tanks that were hiding behind these buildings, have made themselves known. Moving out, looking at a bunch of side armor on the Americans. We will be attempting to destroy some American armor. The left side of the battlefield was pretty much open for a Soviet advance, but with the Americans bringing reinforcements on with 3 dice next turn, it didn't seem likely we could keep that objective. So, much more interested in holding down the Soviet right flank, doing some damage to the Americans, and then mounting their counterattack. Soviet BMPs opened up on their right flank, 4 of them shooting their 7.62mm machine guns into the American infantry. Back here, managing to kill 2 of the bases. The third one fled in terror, as it was the sole survivor, failed its morale check. The Soviet BMP commander shot his 30mm gun into the side of the American tank, but with a firepower anti-tank of a 10, American side armor of 8, it managed to make it safe. It did not make it safe against the battalion commander, though. He would have tried a mistaken target onto the tank in the rear, so it would have been a front armor shot, but he's within 8 inches right there, and so is unable to do that. The 120mm gun punching straight through that American M1's side armor. The 3 T-72 tanks here on the left also managed to land 1 hit, destroying a second M1 tank. Fortunately for the 2 American M1s, the unit leader made his courage check, his morale check, and will remain on the board. But tough turn for the Americans. We'll see if they bring in anything on reserves on turn 3.
Lancaster Boulevard.
American Cobra attack helicopters have arrived on scene or are hiding out behind this line of trees, getting ready to shoot at those T-72 tanks, which have been a bother for the American M1s. The M1s have moved back to the safety of this cornfield. Unit commander back in command of his wingman there, with plenty of targets to see, while the VADs have moved up to the edge of the cornfield to engage some BMPs. Pretty quick movement turn for the Americans. Let's see if they can do some damage next. The American artillery continues to show why it's the king of battle. The observer ranging in to the front of that T-72 tank. They hit all 3. And this front one failed its top armor check, and the American firepower was sufficient to destroy it. So it was down to 2 of its original 4 tanks. Fortunately, the M1 tank was not able to do its part, with both its shots plinking off the front armor of those T-72s. The tank platoon leader, though, put 2 shots into the Soviet commander, failed both his armor checks, and 1 of the American firepower checks was sufficient to destroy him. The VADs did a pretty good job over here on the left, opening up against the Soviet BMPs, doing a total of 6 hits. They bailed 2 out. They were aided by the 50 caliber machine gun, which bailed the 3rd BMP out. They are still in good order, still have 2 tanks, 2 BMPs, which are just fine right now, within 6 inches of the unit leader. So, Americans have done some damage. They've brought their Cobras on. They're not threatening any Soviet objectives right now, but at least they are dwindling Soviet forces. Unfortunately for them, Soviets begin rolling their reserves now on turn 3. Soviet forces may be beginning to despair as no reserves have made it onto the table on their turn 3. All 3 BMP crews have decided not to remount their fighting vehicles and will remain out. This BMP, of course, became unbogged at the start of this turn. So not much firepower left for the Soviets, but they do have quite a bit off board that will be coming in reserves soon. Those American Cobra helicopters are going to remain a problem, though. So we'll see what the Soviets can do on their turn 3. Soviet infantry have made a general advance on the right flank, closing in on the American 113. That belongs to the company commander. Company commander still inside, while the BMP-2s that are still healthy have surrounded the ones that have been bailed out, ready to lay waste to those VADs, hopefully. Over on the left, a clever move by the Soviet tank commander, the company commander there. He has moved his 2 tanks into within 8 inches of those Cobra helicopters and has line of sight on the American tanks. So those Cobras are going to be forced to do some sort of move order if they want to shoot at the T-72s over there. So next is the Soviet shooting phase. Soviets shot 5 RPGs into the 113. Unfortunately, because line of sight issues shooting through those hulks there, unable to roll any 6s, and so that survived. Fortunately, the BMP-2s did better, landing 1 hit against the VADs there, making his 5-up firepower check, and his buddy left the battlefield after seeing his partner going up in flames. 2 T-72s needing 5s to hit the Americans over there in the cornfields failed on both accounts. So the American tanks remain in good order as we go to American turn number 4. The Americans managed to roll for 2 units to come in from reserves. Those are the last 2 American units, the ITVs here in the cornfield on the left, protecting this objective. And then the 113, the other 113 mechanized infantry platoon on the right. They would have loved to have road dashed down this entire road, but unfortunately those T-72s have blocked off the road and can't move dash speed within 8 inches of the enemy. As you can see, the 2 M1 tanks have moved up, being aggressive, trying to now threaten the other Soviet objective, as the one on the left seems well defended. Over here, though, the 113 company commander has moved his track back, does not want to get assaulted. The Soviet infantry were just outside of 4 inches to make that assault last turn. Lastly, the Cobra helicopters passed their skill check and made a they made a blitz move 4 inches back, and now those T-72s are really in trouble between the missiles on the helicopters and the tanks over there. So American turn 4 shooting next. The Americans continued to do a little damage to the Soviets with the attack helicopters bailing both of those tanks out, and then the M1s managed to score 2 hits, pinned both times, but the tank on the left only managed to roll a 1 on its firepower check, so it bailed out that T-72 for a second time. Crew passed the required remount check of a 3-up, while the other tank blew up, and then they just made their morale check of a 3-up as well, so it's still on the board, surrounded by enemies. The American howitzers once again opened up, this time spotting for themselves, ranged in right there, managed to destroy another BMP-2. No damage to any of the others. They had a total of 5 under the template, doing 3 hits. But Soviet armor was once again proof against, for the most part, the 155 shells. All right, now we will go on to Soviet turn 4. The Soviets rolled for reserves and brought in 1 company of T-72s. It's just those 3 tanks, really. But they can take advantage of some poor positioning on the part of those American M1s that are in rear armor right now. Unfortunately, that T-72 failed to make its remount check, as did one of the two BMP-2s on the right flank. The other BMPs, tired of waiting for its comrade to remount, have moved forward up against the American right. They're being supported by all these infantry who have, again, made a general advance up the right flank, eyeing up that 113 with the company commander. It's just going to have a hard time getting away, I fear. Otherwise, the Soviets are well positioned to maybe take out some Americans in this turn 4. The Soviet T-72 company just arrived from reserves, did their job knocking out one of the two American M1 tanks. The other M1 tank made its morale check and will be staying on the board, being a pain to Soviet forces. Over on the right, the BMPs also did their job in knocking out one of the ITVs, bailing out the other. It also made its morale check and will remain on the board, while the Soviet infantry firing a large number of RPGs into the 113 managed to knock it out. The command team has currently been pinned down on the our side, making its 3+ save in order to survive that explosion. Things looking pretty dire for the Americans at this point, but we shall continue on and see if they can pull out a victory. American helicopters and howitzers have remained in place. While on the right flank, the 113s have road dashed up to the objective, the commander giving a follow me order, which was not heeded by his men, but we have 2 units within 3 inches of the objective right now. The American M1 tank has repositioned itself, 14-inch tactical move with those advanced stabilizers behind that building, eyeing up the Soviet tank, which will not go away. Over on the left, ITV has remounted, but the battalion commander, who is being surrounded by a horde of Soviets, is still pinned down. I think his days are certainly numbered, but we shall see as we go into the American turn 5 shooting phase next. It was a mediocre shooting phase for the Americans as the Cobras opened up, hitting twice against the C-72s. On armor checks, rolled a 5 and a 6. The 6 bounced the TOW missile. The 5 made the Americans make a firepower check. They rolled a 1. So no damage at all to the T-72s with those improved TOW missiles. Better luck from the M1 as it managed to destroy that pesky T-72 tank. Didn't manage to do it with a firepower check because it rolled a 1, but the tank crew failed to bail back in, had given up. ITV managed to bail out one of the BMPs there. Obviously it failed its firepower check as a missile went right through the armor, but failed to knock out the vehicle. American artillery once again, first time fire for effect, managed to bring in the artillery shells here, hit 2 of the BMP-2s, but failed to damage them through their top armor, and then only hit 1 of the infantry. Infantry made its 3+ save. It has pinned down the unit though, so maybe it wasn't all for naught as we move into Soviet turn 5. Should mention, Americans are on that objective, so this could be tough for the Soviets. The Soviet right flank, the Gophers have entered play near this objective behind the tree line. This BMP-2 has once again failed to pile back into its fighting vehicle while the infantry remained pinned down by the American artillery. The other BMP-2s have moved up to threaten the ITV and finally the 109s over there on the left. This T-72 closest to us has moved 14 inches using its stabilizers to get a shot on the back of the American tank, while the R2 moved 10 inches. It will be concealed, but they do have line of sight and will be able to shoot it. Just going to be needing 5s to hit all around there. Well, the Carnations have luckily entered on the left and are eyeing up these 113s. These brutal rounds could do some serious damage on the American infantry inside. We shall see if the Soviets can put the game away in this turn by destroying the remainder of America's forces. Mediocre luck for the Soviets in their turn 5 shooting phase as they managed to destroy the M1 tank. That is the last M1 tank the Americans had. Well, the Carnations over here managed to hit twice. 1 firepower check destroyed the lead American 113. The infantry team did get out, making both of his 3-up saves, and the other one was bailed out. And the formation, the unit did manage to make its morale check, so it is still there. Over on the right, the BMP-2s disappointed. No hits against the ITVs, no hits against the howitzers. Total of 8 shots, nothing good there. So that ends the Soviet turn 5. They're looking pretty good still, but we'll see if the Americans can do anything to save themselves here. One American howitzer bogged itself down attempting to move through these woods, while the other one made its cross-check no problem, eyeing up those BMP-2s they know it's going to be an issue. The American commander has unpinned himself and has moved smartly to the rear, facing all those Soviets. Over on the right, the American infantry have dismounted their 113s, and the 113 crew that was in there has managed to bail back into its fighting vehicle. So the Americans, one last gasp, will try to take down the Soviets here in turn 6. The American howitzers opened fire, managed to destroy yet another BMP-2 with direct fire, while the ITV missed its shot, rolling only a 2, but needing a 4 with the Soviets in the cornfield. Over on the right, the American infantry platoon did well, opening up with its laws, bailing out 2 of the Carnations. The unit did make its morale check, so will stay on the board. While over on the left, the Gophers managed to shoot at the Cobras before the Cobras engaged them. In the exchange of fire, nothing happened to the Cobras, but the Gophers did lose, while had one of their vehicles bailed out and won't be able to shoot their turn due to the anti-aircraft rule. So, Soviet turn 6. Next. American howitzers began the turn by opening fire on the BMP-2s, one hit destroying one, yet another one. They've had a rough time of it. While the ITV missed its shot, rolling a 2, but needing a 4 to hit. They're still in good order. Cobras opened up with their improved toes. The Gophers got the first shot in. Unfortunately for the Gophers, they did not manage to score any hits. In return, the Cobras got one hit, bailed out that one, and they failed the morale check, so grenade into the back, and his buddy leaves with both crews. Over on the right, Americans open up with 2 laws. Unfortunately for them, both fail firepower check, but they do bail out 2 of the Carnations. The Carnations do make their morale check, though, and will stay on the board. Soviet turn 6 coming up. The Soviets failed to remount the Carnations, but that did not matter on their left flank, as the T-72s moved over, killing 3 infantry bases with their machine guns and forcing the other 2 to flee in terror, while the one Carnation that was still in bailed out the American 113, and so they would need a morale check as well. As you can see, with the BMP-2s opening fire, destroying 2 of the M109 howitzers, there's not much left on the board for the Americans as the Soviets push up on the right, no longer able to capture this objective here on the Soviet left or this objective here on the Soviet right. The American commander back there concedes that this battle is lost and will be withdrawing his forces, or what's left of them. So, victory for the Soviet Union.